we've got the brand new Canon R1, which we've been excited waiting for this camera for a long time. And I feel like Canon was like, this camera should be our flagship. And let me just paint the picture for you as someone who, especially around the same time, was rocking heavy with Canon. So Canon's releasing mirrorless cameras one after another. We're getting R5s, R6s. We get the R3 and everybody goes, this is the flagship. And Canon says, no. Let's make it very clear that the R3 is not the flagship.
I got a question for you, Brandon.
Yeah.
Do you think that the R3 was the flagship until they saw the Z9? Because Canon, was Canon the last of the party?
They're always last of the party.
Yeah, they were the last of the party.
Yep.
Do you think that they saw the A1 and the Z9 and said, actually, this is not our flagship?
Look, I'm going to be honest with you. When I look at this graphic and then I look at my R1 that's right here and I go, that's a very easy little part right there just to swap out that R1 to an R3, and they say, this is not it.
Yeah.
This is not it. We're gonna switch this over to an R3. Because I'll be honest with you.
It's just a sticker.
I'm looking at the R1 now and looking at the R3 and saying, we've got, if we look at let's go to the back of the camera. You want to pull that up?
Oh, yes.
You need me to get it?
I got it.
Okay, so if we look at the back of this camera, I'm looking at the back of this camera. I'm looking at the back of my R3 here, and I'm just like, I mean, there are some changes. There are some notable differences. We've got some extra buttons along the bottom, but like, I mean, the R3 already had the flip out screen. So like, are we looking at a completely different camera here? I'm not 100% sure. But if we go into the specs, I think this is where I want you to actually break these things down. Because I feel like when we look at the specs on the R1, this is where things really do change. So Jarrell, why don't you break down the specs for us here?
Yeah, so it seems like the rumor sites were a little off when it came to the specs, because we had been rumored to have a 30 megapixel, maybe even higher, but it actually ends up at 24 megapixels, which, does that feel low to you, Brandon, for a flagship?
I mean, full transparency, like, I feel like 24 megapixels is kind of a sweet spot if you're aiming for 6K. And because we got the R5 II, which we're going to talk about here in a second, at the same time, it feels like there's almost two flagships, which is the point that I'll kind of like really jump into later. But like, it feels like we got a high megapixel flagship and we got a lower megapixel flagship that's like, you know, good for sports and low light and stuff like that. So, but 24 feels low, but 30 to 24, you're not really gaining too much extra, so it's okay.
Yeah, to me, it feels a little low for the competition, the A1 and the Z9.
Yes.
That's where it feels low, but for sports, which this is what this is geared at,
Yep.
It's probably plenty.
Yeah.
Because
probably.
You're also, you probably have the correct lenses also to not have to crop crazy. So anyways,
too much. Yeah.
One of the things that I'm most excited, and we're going to play a little game in a little bit, but they upgraded. Another thing that the rumor sites got wrong is it's not quad pixel autofocus. It is dual pixel autofocus, but it's like 2.0. And from what I've seen, it's sticky. It looks like the best autofocus in any camera ever. So excited about that. Interesting. 6K 60. And 4K 120. Does the R3 have 6K 60? 4K 120?
It does.
So that feels like a little bit of a
we had this already.
It's already done. And maybe
now, granted, they are giving us C-Log 2, so better, I guess. But from a resolution, and like, I'll be fully transparent. Do I need more than 60 frames per second at 6K? No. And with the megapixel count, were we gonna get to 8K? No.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't feel like an upgrade. I think because the R3 already had it, but I think that also just goes to show like that the R3 was already swinging pretty heavy above his weight class, at least within the Canon world. But again, Canon doesn't just live in a Canon world. We do have Z8s and A1s
Yeah.
that are running amok.
So the EVF looks like it's insane.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, we don't have it. We haven't put our hands on it. We haven't looked through it, but it's huge. And that 9.44 million dot looks insane. It looks like you're looking through a telescope. So that's good. And then another huge, I think this is a step up from the R3. You have 2 CF Express Type B slots.
Yes.
Is the R3 like is that like an SD and
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So you can run heavy.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where like, and I like the idea. I like the addition of the CF Express Type B card slots and having 2 of them. It is something that I've actively asked for. Like that's one of the things I like about the C70. It's like back then they couldn't do 2 CF Express Type B card slots for whatever reason, write speeds, heat, whatever. And so they put 2 SD card slots. And I actually prefer that the slots match. If you're going to do 2 slots, make a match, because the ability to like continuously record, whether that's video or taking photos and moving over to the secondary card, you're not losing anything, any write speeds or anything like that. Having dual cards almost is like when there's like when one is slower, almost for me just puts me in a place of like, okay, really I just have 1 card slot and the second one might be used for proxies if the camera allows it, but having 2 CF Express Type B card slots, I think for this camera is a huge win.
Yeah, I can say with the C70, it makes my life so much easier than being the same.
Yeah.
So much easier.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I mean, I feel like this is kind of like Apple's illusion of thinness. Like the consumer wants thin. And maybe it might have to do with heat, like you said. But it's like, no, if you need to add extra thickness to do 2, especially on the R5 Mark II, do it.
I think it might be heat. I think it also might be processing, because that is one other big upgrade with this camera is the processors have all been upgraded quite a bit. And so that's all looking very positive. Happy about that. I think those are pretty good specs. So when we look at the R1, Jarrell, just a quick answer. Good, bad.
Good.
It's a good camera.
It's a good camera.
Yeah.
100%. I will say, like, to add on to that answer, the autofocus looks incredible. I know I've said it, but oh my goodness, I don't think that I have seen, and to be fair, haven't used it, I don't think I've seen anything that sticks better, especially with the AI features that they've added to it. I think are going to be incredible, and how it predicts what you want to be in focus. And that seems a little scary, especially when you think about how much cinematographers and content creators, they care about like you want creative control over the process. But I feel like, man, that autofocus is faster than your brain can think. And so I'm really excited about that. I think the quality from it looks incredible. I think they improved on a bunch of stuff, but it does feel a little like a better R3 rather than a proper R1.
I feel like it is a R3 Mark II in a lot of ways, but there are certain things where like I'm like, I would love for that to be a software update that goes into my R3 that would make it capable of doing that, because there's nothing that the R3 currently does from like a quality standpoint that the new R1 doesn't give me that I'm not excited about. You know what I mean?
In fact, I think that there's a few features that are available on the R3 that are not available on the R1, which is kind of like, okay, that 120 frames per second
yes
photography, that's not available in the R1, but that was a software upgrade
It
to the
was.
R3. So hypothetically,
It could
it
come.
can come to the R1.
And like, I'll be honest, I have used that feature a few times, especially like photographing baseball, like when you want to get that perfect moment. But there were limitations to it that, as far as I'm concerned, if they don't bring that to the R1, there's no point in bringing that feature over. Like, for example, one of the ones was like it blacked out. So you would take a photo and like, sure, it says 120 photos per second. That's the speed that it's capturing it at, but it actually only can capture 50 photos.
Mm.
And on top of that, once it captures those 50,
So wait a minute. That's confusing.
yes. So it captures 120 photos a second. That is the speed.
Oh.
But the actually amount of photos that it gives
that
you
feels-
is 50.
That feels slimy.
Also, when that happens, it stops focusing.
Mm.
So wherever your focus is when you press the shutter, that's it. And you either get it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's one of those things where like one of the new features that they mentioned is like the pre-recording, but for photography.
Pre-continuous, yeah.
Pre-continuous photos. That's actually more valuable to me than anything else, because I can't tell you when you're sitting at the plate and you're capturing baseball and you want to capture that moment, but you don't know if they're actually going to make contact or not. So you're firing off a bunch of like watching the ball pass by,
Mm-hmm.
strikes. You don't want those photos. You're gonna end up throwing those photos away anyway. So I feel like the pre-capture is actually more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
But to my point, I think that when I look at this camera and I look at the R3, the quality out of the R3 to me is totally fine. It's great. The image quality, the megapixels, the 6K, 60 frames per second. Like, there's nothing quality-wise out of the R1 that I saw that made me want that in the R3. Most of what I want is software related, like the autofocus, like the ability to register faces inside of the camera and have it prioritize those, or the sticky, or being able to choose certain like actual sports. Like saying like, I'm photographing basketball, I'm photographing volleyball, like I'm photographing these sports. Now tune your algorithm to that sport in particular. Those are things that I'm like, I know that I won't get as far as software is related, because I know there is a hardware element with the new processor.
Yeah.
But like, from the quality, I feel like I'm getting about the same quality as the R3. Now I could be wrong. Obviously, haven't shot with the R1, but I'm just like, I don't know if I'm gonna really see that big of a jump.